Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. After all the research we've done today, Mason, for this episode, I'm feeling a little Scroogey. A little bitter.
Yeah.
So y'all have been warned. There's probably going to be some naughty words in our episode today. So welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, and I no longer sound congested or like I have a cold. So celebrating that,
Congratulations to you.
I know, right?
Congratulations to you.
Be grateful you missed the snotty story I told Mason right before we hit the record button. And Mason is joining us today as our co-host. So we're excited to be back.
Yep, here we are.
All right.
Here we go. One more time. Everybody's feeling fine.
What on earth is that?
If you have to ask, I'm just not going to tell you.
Rude. Okay, I don't really care. All right, so...
That's part of the reason I'm not going to tell you, because I know you just don't care.
Lovely. Okay, great. So let's talk today about financial exploitation. And... Oh, Mace, did you have something you were going to say?
You said that there might be bad words. We're feeling kind of blah right now because of that. If you go back into the history of this podcast, you'll see that there were a set of 5 shows that we did that were Sarah's big issues why she left the church. One of them was tithing. So here we are again talking about not tithing particularly, but financial manipulation and exploitation. So going back to the bite model, we're talking about the tools and the things that cults or cult-like organizations do to manipulate you into staying in the system. And so now we're going to talk about tithing and the things that go along with that help to keep people in the system.
Right. And the reason that we chose this topic today is because we have a listener named James who specifically asked us to do an episode on how the Mormon Church influences members' financial choices beyond just paying tithing. And I felt like this was a great episode to go into our cult series because of the, again, deception, flattery, trickery, coercion, and that lulling or like mild hypnotic stuff that you get regarding tithing. And so I wanted to make sure that we did that. Shout out to James. James, thank you so much for reaching out to us and asking us to dig into this a little bit more. We are very excited to not only meet that need, but to do it in a way that demonstrates how the church's teachings on tithing infiltrate more than just the charitable contributions their members are making to the church. So we're going to explore more than just paying tithing. But in the beginning, I think we're going to start with the actual principle of paying tithing.
You're pointing at me. What do you want?
You're the one who was going to talk about the video, and I'm pointing at you.
The video.
Oh, I'm sorry. Our intent is to identify financial exploitation within religious systems, specifically Mormonism, and then talk about what can you as a member or as an exmo or as a human in the universe, what can you do about it when you see it? All right?
Yeah, well, let me start with just one little caveat. Both Sarah and I believe in being generous. We believe in giving when you can give and maybe even stretching yourself a little bit in order to give and help other people around you. So I don't want this to turn into a selfish, bitter diatribe. Do not give your money away, because that's not what this is. I believe that a lot of good comes from giving of yourself. It makes you a better person, and it certainly helps the people around you. But that's probably all I'm going to say on the positive side of giving, because there's a lot of now what we're going to go into.
Well, and I want to clarify, I'm a huge fan of being generous. Absolutely.
Right.
But I'm also a huge fan of boundaries.
Right.
I want to be able to give when I have discretionary income to give.
Right.
I want to be able to give of my time when there's discretionary time left over where I have the energy and the financial resources to do so. One of the things that we're going to talk about is the deep exploitation of those who are impoverished. And I'm not talking about poverty in the United States. We definitely see poverty in the United States, but we don't see poverty in the United States the way that poverty is seen in parts of South America, parts of, the island communities. So like the Philippines, or Mason, you and I, oh, wait, you didn't go on that cruise with me. A good friend of mine, Stephanie, and I were recently in the Caicos Islands, specifically Grand Turk. And I mean, that's a whole different level of poverty than what we see here in the United States. Mason, you and I went to Belize, and the poverty that we saw there, like we don't see that level of poverty here in the United States as much as other countries. And so we're going to be looking at how the church is utilizing spiritual manipulation, coercion, deceit, and those types of things to exploit the severely impoverished.
Yeah, and one of the operative words there is exploitation, right? They're using these tools to exploit the membership. And that's what we want to get into. So one of our viewers posted on our Facebook page, Mormonism, Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page. His name is Rod. If you want his last name, then you can go to the page and find it out for yourself. But he posted a copy of this video that was made by John Dehlin and posted back in 2020, right after the Washington Post. And then there was a TV news article, I forget where it was, I don't remember now, that announced the fact that the whistleblower had called for an investigation from the SEC and the IRS. So this is 3 years ago. Recently, we, of course, did an episode on the results of that SEC investigation. But this video from John Dehlin is 15 minutes. It's a lot of cutting in words from general authorities over the years, talking about how salvation is free, that tithing is a gift, that God's love is free, basically. And then he just moves it all right into all the exploitive language that general authorities typically use. And I'm going to start with just this one right here, because this comes from the Doctrine and Covenants. I have never really read it this way until recently, and perspectives have changed, but it says this, at Doctrine and Covenants 64, verse 23, "Behold, now it is called today until the coming of the Son of Man, and verily it is a day of sacrifice, and a day for the tithing of my people, for he that is tithed shall not be burned at his coming." And what I want to point out, and from the video, we'll talk a little bit about what you and I gleaned from that, but the idea that tithing is the operative piece of being burned at the second coming. If that is not exploitive, I'm not sure what is.
Right. Well, and I think from a historical perspective, it's important to remember that in Joseph Smith's day, you were supposed to pay 10% of your discretionary income. And it wasn't until much later, I want to say Heber J. Grant, but I could be wrong on that. Like those little details and facts are not my strong suit, but it wasn't until several prophets later that it became 10% of your gross income. And I remember, in my early 20s, the constant go back and forth and lessons that were given in gospel doctrine or in other areas or talks in sacrament about, do you pay on your net or your gross? And I remember for you and I, Mason, we paid on our net income because at the end of the year when we got our tax return, we made more in our tax return than we had paid in because of like the earned income tax credit and whatnot. So in order for us to pay on the quote unquote gross, we paid on our net and then we paid on our tax return, and that we felt like that covered our gross. But it was a constant back and forth about what was the right way to do it, which is so interesting.
Well, because it's a fear-based response, because we didn't want to be caught in a situation where we weren't giving what we were supposed to be giving
Right.
to the church and to the Lord.
We wanted to be worthy.
We were afraid that maybe when we went to get our temple recommends, that the Spirit would whisper to us, nah, you guys really aren't full tithe payers, and then we're not in full fellowship with the saints, right?
Right.
I had a thought just now that really stuck out to me, because you had said, that Joseph Smith initially set it up as tithing this way, and then it changed later on. And the thing that came to me is the scriptures are replete with things that say that God teaches you line upon line,
precept
upon precept, right? And what this new perspective that I see there is that is a manipulative way of holding on to people. Because in this case, Joseph Smith introduces tithing. Hey, look, we need to pay tithing. We need to support the church. But right now, all I want you to do is pay 10% on what you have left over. And then as people start to accept the idea, later on it's, no, the Lord wants you to pay 10% on everything that you're making.
Right.
And later on it's, yeah, we want you to pay that 10%, but also we need you to pay fast offerings, because we don't have the ability to take care of poor people if you don't pay directly into that. And then there's the perpetual education fund and the temple fund, and there's all these different things. There's a missionary fund. We can't support missionary work if you don't give and give and give. That's line upon line, and it feels very manipulative and exploitive.
Absolutely. Well, and line upon line is a concept. I mean, we utilize it all the time. We're going to help our children learn how to roll
It's not
over
necessarily
and
bad.
crawl before they walk, and
Right.
then run, and then gymnastics and those types of things. Although I'm sure there's some like extreme gymnast that's like, no, I was on the bars before I could even walk. So woo-hoo.
Sure,
Some
good for
people
them.
do it out of
Good
order.
on you.
Right. But you generally learn, the names and the sounds of your letters before you blend them and read. You
Right.
learn addition and subtraction before you learn multiplication and division. So again, there's nothing wrong with line upon line, but the issue was, where does asking for money end? And today the church definitely has the money to pay for all of these extracurricular activities that our youth are doing, and yet they still do fundraising. And that fundraising is very incestual in the sense that, they do things like spaghetti dinner and a dessert auction, which is the members of the ward coming in and giving extra
giving more
money to
money,
pay
yeah.
for girls' camp and whatnot. So it's still very much alive and well today that the church is asking for more money
Yeah.
than they need at the expense of their members.
Yeah, so you asked about the video. So let me just share a couple things that I remember from that video, and then you can do the same,
Yeah,
and we'll move on.
I've got like a whole
You've got a whole
list
long
here.
list of things that you wrote down.
And my page is more full than yours. And I think it's because I have less words, but big fat handwriting. You have shorter list, but smaller handwriting. So I think you have more to say over there.
Well, and just a few things that stood out to me, because frankly, if you want to get from that video what the message was from John Dehlin, go watch the video. It's 15 minutes.
Right. And so before
It is now posted on our site as well.
Right.
From Rod.
Right. So Rod posted it, but I actually emailed the link to Alex Vidalis, who is our producer here at Daisy Girl Communications. And I have asked Alex to redrop this video link on all of our social media platforms. So you can find Daisy Girl Communications, you can find Unpacking Mormonism, you can find Sarah Westbrook on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are the 3 platforms that we are building our community on. So please, if you're in those communities, go and find us. And we are going to have our social media team, under the direction of our producer, redrop this video on those social media pages
Today.
today.
When this episode
before
drops,
this
it should be
episode
there. Yeah, that's
drops.
awesome.
Absolutely. And then, Mason, do you have the actual name of this for those people who are not on social media? Let's get the actual name. So if you are not on our social media pages, you can find this directly on YouTube. The title of it is
Tithing and the LDS/Mormon Church. For me, I found it by Googling, so I would have the link here. I just Googled John Dehlin and tithing, and it was the first thing that came up.
So there you go.
But
so
that's the
how
title
you
of
find
it, Tithing in the LDS Church.
And we didn't want to play that here. Number one, I'm not 100%, what the rules are for copyright. Still learning those things as we're still a newer podcast. But I also want to make sure that John Dehlin is getting the hits and the likes and the subscriptions, because that video was very well done. I'm sure it took several hours. We want to make sure our listeners, when you go there and listen to that they are getting the financial support that comes as, ads play and whatnot as they are monetizing their site. We want to make sure that you guys have the ability to support them by watching it on their link. And then I would encourage our listeners, please like it and subscribe to it. John Dehlin and the Mormon Stories team, they do a lot of really good things. I don't agree with everything he says, but the resources and most of what he says, I think is very well done. And one of the things that I really like about this ex-Mormon space is that there's a great deal of community and shared, what's the word I'm looking for?
Resources.
Yeah, we're not in competition with each other. We are very friendly, very open with sharing the things that we find valuable on each other's platform. So go ahead, Mason, in the video.
I'll tell you what I wrote down, because what really stood out to me was at the end, because we try to do this, but at the end, John Dehlin gave a call to action. He basically said, these are the things that you need to do or not do. The first one was recognize that Jesus Christ was a champion of the poor, not an exploiter of the poor.
Right. Jesus Christ did not go to the poor and beg them for more money.
Right. He was constantly saying,
feed the poor, take care of them,
what you have and
house
give.
them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Second, he says, stop exploitive language. And this one matters a lot to me because, again, we're talking about exploitation. And when you look at the bite model, that's what we're talking about, is we're using manipulation to keep people in. And in this case, you're talking about exploitation of people. Third, stop connecting things to tithing. And what he meant by that was wealth. Good. There's even one time when one of the general authorities says that you'll be better looking if you pay your tithing, that you'll have greater wealth if you pay your tithing, that you can't be happy unless you're paying your tithing. And then there's a huge section where he quotes, or the prophets are quoting Doctrine and Covenants 64:23 that I read, that you shall not be burned at the coming of the Lord. Over and over again. This is a very common theme. That is exploitation. It is causing a fear response to get you to give more to the church.
Right. So on my list, I just like rapid fire wrote them down. So some of the promises that were made.
There was smoke going on over there.
Right. See, that's how come my handwriting is so big and fat. Because if I'm going to write fast, I'm going to write huge.
If I write fast, it's going to be smaller.
I know. How that makes logical sense, I don't know, but that's who I am.
Less ink, less movement.
Heck no. I get all excited and you can see it in my handwriting. Like down here, I look like a doctor. I can barely read what I wrote.
Well, like you said, this is not the bulk of what we want to talk about, but we do want to kind of get started with some of this information.
So in that video, the promises that were made amongst... So one of the things I liked about the video too is that we've got older and more recent general conference talks. So this has been, which illustrates this has been taught for decades upon decades. So the first thing that they talk about is we cannot, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons, cannot afford not to pay tithing.
Right.
So basically meaning if you don't pay your tithing, shit's going to go down. Bad things are going to happen to you. And so another one was...
God sounds awful petty.
Yes, he does.
Awful petty, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things they said was you need to pay tithing before you eat. If your children need new shoes, pay tithing first. So this is pay tithing, give money to the church before you're taking care of your family. President Oaks several times said tithe payers will have better health. You'll be able to keep your jobs better. You'll have better employment if you pay your tithing. So the implied message there is if you don't pay your tithing, you're going to be sickly and you're going to have a worse job and you might get fired.
Oh, one person even said that. There was a cut of an apostle or somebody talking about how some guy had gone to the hospital and hadn't paid his tithing. And he says, I'm not saying that he had to pay those medical bills because he didn't pay his tithing, but he did. Basically is kind of what he says. And I was like, holy crap.
Right. Well, they also said that if you don't pay your tithing, you're more likely to get divorced. And so we've got some interesting statistics here because, of course, I'm like, all right, let's back that up with actual data. And yes, statistics can be subjective, but yeah, maybe we'll see. Paying tithing will make you more wealthy. It's the best investment you will ever make, which I want to put a caveat in here. We're going to be talking about an episode done by Mormonism Live, so Bill Reel and RFM. And one of the things, I can't remember the name of the gentleman they were interviewing. Mason, what episode was that? So I can shout that out. What number was it?
Episode 128, Gone in 60 Minutes.
Yeah,
That's
so Gone in 60 Minutes. So it's right. They're reviewing the most recent 60 Minutes episode where they were interviewing President Nielsen about the church's finances and talking about some of the SEC stuff and whatnot. And so I can't remember the name of the gentleman they interviewed. Mason's going to look that up real quick. But one of the things they said was that Utah is dead last in retirement savings, which I find so interesting because according to the Mormon Church and what this video that John Dehlin did, tithing is the best investment you'll ever make. So now we've got the churches advocating giving to the church before you protect your financial assets for retirement. So
maybe they felt like it would be the best investment that you'll make for us.
Right.
That's been demonstrated.
That's definitely been demonstrated. But Mason, I look at both of our parents. Both of them, their retirement is shitty.
Yeah.
Like they are struggling. And it makes me wonder if they'd taken just half of their tithing and put that in an investment account, how much more comfortable they would be, how much less dependent on the church they might be. Because when I look at this Stephen Hassan worksheet that we've been working on the last few weeks, so if you haven't been with us the last few weeks, this comes from Freedom of Mind. It is the worksheet from Stephen Hassan, Undoing Undue Influence in the Bite Model. Second page under Behavioral Control number 7, Financial Exploitation, Manipulation, or Dependence. Time for a commercial break. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the church is basically asking you to give yourself poor, even though they claim you can't do that, but they're asking you to give yourself poor and then go back to the church for aid, therefore making you financially dependent, which we'll get into later. I've got one of them said, if you don't pay, you'll be cursed. There was one of them that said that.
Yep.
If you pay tithing, ye shall not be burned. And they played that several different prophets, apostles, over the course of decades.
At least 10.
I don't know how many. I've got your happiness, including marital relationship happiness, is dependent on whether or not you pay tithing. Your job success, which I've said before, your health, and your safety in the next life. All of those are going to happen if you pay tithing. And even to pay tithing before food, shoes, and rent are things that I heard all in that video. So I did some research. Utah is one of the more wealthy states. And what I mean by that is that the median income, so basically the average income per family in the state of Utah is, and the link for this is in the show notes, $79,133 a year. And again, despite the fact, so like I think New York and Connecticut were amongst the highest, and their average income per person living in those states was around $95,000, $96,000 a year. Okay. So in comparison to that, so they are, I'm not going to say they're not in the top 15. I looked at that, but I would say maybe the top 25. So they are in the top half of wealthiest average incomes in the United States. And yet that Mormonism Live episode, we learned that they are dead last in retirement investment. And Utah is where we have the most Mormons. Now, again, statistics are very subjective, but I think that this is very suggestive that Mormons do not place a high level of importance on saving for retirement. You know, I remember...
It would seem so, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember growing up in the Mormon church, learning that I needed to have a year's supply of food, and that the year's supply of food was definitely pushed more is not the right, much more, there we go, much more than saving for a rainy day. Now, we did have advice of saving for a rainy day, but it was more like an emergency fund, not saving for, like 6 months of income replacement. I don't ever remember learning that anywhere.
Not till Dave Ramsey,
Not
right?
till Dave Ramsey did I start learning about an emergency fund, and then a longer term emergency fund, and then an even longer term emergency fund, and then paying off my house and retirement and those types of things. We did get the advice of stay out of debt, but not what to do with necessary debt and how to get rid of that quickly. I learned all of that financial sense starting with Dave Ramsey and then consulting with a qualified financial provider. The other statistic I looked up was the divorce rate. So in Utah, we have been told that if you pay your tithing, your marriage is going to be protected. And yet, again, the link is in the show notes, Utah ranks 8th highest divorce rate as of 2020 in the United States, with, I think it was 9.4 out of every 1,000 people are divorced. So if we take that 9.4 and we cut that in half, see, I'm very bad at statistical math. I did pass it in college and then forgot.
It's 4.7.
Right. So, but 500. So if it's 9.4 out of every 1,000 people, that's 500 couples, right? You would assume if they're all still living in Utah, and I know, again...
9.4 out of 1,000?
9.4 individuals out of 1,000. So then if we take that...
Oh, yeah, it's not even close to that.
For individuals, that would be like 500 couples-ish.
No, it would be like 4 people per 100.
4 people per 100?
Yeah, I'm not even doing the math on the spot.
Right, no, because the national average is 40 to 50% of marriages will end in divorce. But 9.4 out of 1,000 people living in Utah are divorced.
So we're just trying to demonstrate to you right now that statistics is not our strong point.
Right, we suck at statistics, but they did have the 8th highest divorce rate in the nation as of 2022. And again, the link is in the show notes. So if there's a listener that wants to... I'm sure that's just all the
non-Mormons living there.
Do better. Right, that's all the non-Mormons. Right. Ha ha ha. Very funny. So yeah, I know as a counselor that arguing over finances or being financially strapped is one of the leading causes of divorce. It's one of the leading things that it's actually... Let me rephrase. It's not the leading cause of divorce. The leading cause of divorce is shitty communication. I'm just going to say that right now. But couples, one of the things that we fight over the most is
they failed
money.
To communicate well about.
Right. Money, kids, and sex are the things that most couples fight over the most. And so if you have shitty communication and you're struggling financially, it increases your risk for divorce. So that was our video description. Mace, do you have anything else you wanted to say?
We're 25 minutes in. Are you ready to move forward, or was there more on the video that you wanted to share?
No, I'm good on the video, and we are 28 minutes in. Thank you very much.
Excuse me.
Just teasing you. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, Mason, is that, I have a published story the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints bought a true story that I wrote. It was the very first time I'd ever been published, and that was in the Latter-day Saint Voices and the Ensign, and that was June. It was published in the June 2005 episode, and it is titled My Tithing Tire. Now, I am going to tell you right now, this story is in fact true. It did happen. I did not lie in this case. Now, having said that, there are many times I've gotten up and borne a testimony and exaggerated or stretched the truth in order to lie for the Lord. But in this case, this story is not a lie. This really happened. It was a huge miracle for me at the time. Looking back, I have to kind of chuckle. My son now works in a mechanic shop and has told me some stories that makes me kind of chuckle and go, oh, I bet that's what happened to me. But at the time, it was absolutely a miracle. However, I'm pissed at the church because what they did when they bought my article is they gave me, basically they said, hey, we rewrote it and here's the new version of it. And I was so excited to be published, and they paid me $100 for this article. I was so excited to be published, younger than my dad. So that should tell you something about Sarah's competitive nature. And my dad was livid. So you would think dad would be excited for you. My dad was not. He was livid because he had submitted many things, I think, to the church and had never been picked up. This was the very first thing I'd ever submitted to the church. It got picked up. But again, it's content. My dad liked to write children's stories. I write true stories. And so this was the first one. So recap of that story. It was the first time in my adult life that I'd ever questioned tithing. Now, having said that, Mason had been in charge of the bills up to about 6 months before this happened. And I had struggled paying tithing as a teen because, frankly, I wanted more candy bars. And my parents did this. You have to put 50% of your income into savings and then 10% to tithing. So by the time all was said and done, I was working my ass off and had very little money to show for it. So I wasn't very good at paying my tithing as a teenager. But as an adult, we were starving, y'all. Mason had worked a contract for the United States Postal Service. We were grossing somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000 a year. And when he joined the military, we were making closer to $25,000 a year. We were broke. So, and we had not had anybody teach us about saving for rainy days or any of that. So when we were making that 60 to 75 grand, we were spending 60 to 75 grand. And most of our money was spent on eating out at dinner at Denny's and Disney VHSs. Am I right?
No, you're not right. But a lot of it was spent there.
So we were very young with too much money.
And we had a plan, like we owned a house and we were going to be able to sell it and pay off a lot of the debt that we had. And that didn't work out for other reasons.
It didn't work out because of the Rodeo Chedeski fire in northeastern Arizona. Our home did not burn, but property values plummeted. So we were supposed to sell our home and get about $40,000 to $50,000 worth of equity in the home that we had purchased. And after the Rodeo Chedeski fire went through, we couldn't afford that mortgage. We really couldn't afford to put renters in it. And we ended up short selling that home, which meant that our equity, which was supposed to pay off our debt and our timeshare, y'all, we were stupid. We had a timeshare. We were 20. We didn't even vacation. We did not use it
all
once.
My secrets away.
Right? Hey, I'm just letting you know, part of the reason we were so stupid with our money is neither of our parents had taught us what to do about the money, because neither of our parents were doing it with their money. Like, nobody had taught us how to use our money. And it was not something that we were taught in church. And at the time, I remember my financial education in high school was more about balancing a checkbook. It wasn't about investing or savings, or I didn't take a class that would have given me that information in schooling either. So like, we didn't have the knowledge to do better, and we didn't.
And I will frankly say flat out, there was an underlying idea that if I continued to pay my tithing, things would be okay.
Right. We would be okay. And so we paid the tithing, right? So we are now, like 6 months, 7 months, 8 months into Mason's military career. We were in San Antonio at AIT. So that's Advanced Individual Training, Mason. So for those who are not military familiar.
That was just schooling for what my specific job would be.
This was, he had finished basic training, and then he went into the second portion of school to become a combat medic. And then Mason went into a third section of school for nursing school. So we are in combat medic school. So at this time, Mason is a pleading for change PFC, which is an E3 or a private first class. That means we were freaking broke, y'all. PFC, private first class, pleading for change. We were broke. And so we were living in San Antonio, and we were making very little money, but I was still having to pay for the bills that we had accrued, the debt that we had accrued when Mason was making almost triple what we were making at that point. And by the time I'd paid all of our obligations, we were left with around $100 a month. And that $100 a month had to cover gas for the car and food and diapers for Eric, who was still in diapers. We had just Eric at the time. And so with $100, I mean, yes, there's been a huge deal of inflation, but to say that Eric and I were pretty much eating spaghetti and beans and rice is an understatement. Mason actually went to the DFAC, and he would get like these to-go boxes, and then he would bring some of that home to us on the weekends because we just didn't have money. And I didn't know at that point how to even access the church's welfare system, because I grew up in a home where my father was incredibly proud, and I was taught to ask for help from the church for financial stuff meant I was a failure. Yeah. And I was not to do it because that money was to help those who were actually poor. So I didn't actually recognize how poor we were. And again, I was not as poor as, say, those in deeply impoverished countries. We had an apartment. I had a roof over my head. We had one working vehicle, and I had food. So our essentials were covered, but there was nothing left over. And I remember being really irritated in paying tithing because our tithing was like $125 a month or a paycheck or something like that. And so it wasn't even enough. Our tithing was not enough to pay like the electric bill at the church, but that extra $125 for me would have literally more than doubled what I could have spent on food, gasoline. I could have put money in a savings account for some car maintenance and whatnot. So needless to say, I was broke. Well, one morning I get up, I go out to our car, and our car the air is low in the tire. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Okay, I've got enough money. I got to go grocery shopping. You know, I've got like my $100 or whatever. And I've got my tithing check that I have not yet given to the bishop because we're sometime middle of the week. And I, get showered, and I'm like, I'm planning on going to a gas station, putting some air in the tire, and then taking it to Walmart and hope that, hey, if there's a flat or whatever, then I'll be able to repair it. At the time, a flat repair at Walmart was costing about $5.
Yeah, it wasn't very much.
Yeah, it wasn't very much for a flat repair at Walmart. And I was like, well, that sucks. But I'll, while they're repairing my flat, I'll go grocery shopping, and I'll, have to give up a gallon of milk or a couple gallons of milk or something, and we'll make it work. It'll be okay. Well, I put the air in my tire. I go to Walmart. And actually, let me back up. I was really tempted not to pay my tithing. And I was like, you know what? Just in case, I'm going to go ahead and mail this tithing check. So I did. I put it in the mailbox so that way I wouldn't be tempted to not pay my tithing. So long story short, I get to Walmart, and they tell me that the flat cannot be repaired. The nail is in the tire wall. And I said, I don't believe you. Show me the nail. Because I'm like, I'm afraid that they're trying to exploit me.
Right.
And I'm broke, y'all. I can't afford it. It was going to cost me like $110 in order to get the new tire put on my Toyota Avalon. And so I was like, no, it can't be that. So they took me out into the shop and showed me, and I saw the nail. It was absolutely in the wall of the tire. Have no idea how it got there. Like, how did I pick up a nail in the wall of my tire and whatnot? But I was pretty pissed. So I said, fine, fix it. And I'm planning, so it was so close to payday that I'm planning on literally letting Walmart run my debit card and bounce my account at this point. I'm that frustrated. So anyway, I go back in, and now I'm not grocery shopping because I'm going to have to pay for a new tire, and I'm worried about what I'm going to do. And about 10 minutes later, the technician from Walmart comes back in and says, hey, your car has locking lug nuts. We can't find the key to get those off. Y'all, it was in the trunk. They're just blind. So anyway, they said, we've put air in your tire, drive like 5 miles down the street to a Pep Boys in, basically central San Antonio, and they will have the tool to get your locking lug nuts off so that they can repair the tires. So then I go to Pep Boys. I tell them what's going on. They said, okay, great. They put my tire in the bay, or my car in the bay, and I go into the waiting room, and Mason calls. And this is the part that's not written in that article. Mason's on the phone, and he's like, well, how are you planning on paying this? And I was like, I don't know. I'm going to have to write a hot check somewhere to the electric bill or something. I'm going to have to be writing a hot check. And I was talking pretty loud because I was a little bit frustrated.
So let's take a quick commercial break. Unpacking Mormonism. We'll be right back.
Despite the unshakable Iowa Corn-Cyhawk rivalry, there is one thing Iowa State and University of Iowa fans can both agree on: getting hyped for Unleaded 88. It's cleaner burning and better for your engine, and it's cheaper than other fuel options, making Unleaded 88 the clear fuel choice. If Iowa Corn-Cyhawk rivals can agree on it, you know it's worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88, grown by Iowa corn farmers.
Well, about an hour and a half later, Pep Boys comes out and says, we don't know what happened, but there's no hole in your tire. You're good. And I was shocked. For me, that was a huge miracle. Now, my guess is that a do-gooder either heard what I was saying and had my tire replaced for me and paid for it, or there may have been a mistake made in the bay where they replaced my tire, or Pep Boys took pity on me and replaced the tire. I do not actually believe that the hole in the tire just sealed up naturally because I saw the nail. But for me at that time, that was a huge miracle, and it boosted my testimony of paying tithing.
Because you see it from the lens of it being
right.
a miracle.
I interpreted that experience from the lens of Mormonism. However,
the church has connected it, right? The church has connected the miracles, the financial, especially financial miracles that come because you've paid your tithing. They've made it an easy stretch for you.
Right. So I wrote this article. I was super excited, super mad at the church for taking all of the emotion out of that. Now that I'm having my book published, it was very much a telly article. It was kind of boring. And then the picture they did, y'all, I was in my young early 20s, and the picture in the magazine looks like a lady who's all frumpy in her 40s. And I was like, that does not look like me. She looks like me now, but she didn't look like me then, which is kind of funny.
Details,
yeah, so I was a little irritated. I was not pleased with the final product after the church edited my article, which gave me the opportunity to learn how to make sure I demand what I want out of my book. So my book is definite. I'm very proud of that. So anyway, but I interpreted that miracle as paying tithing. However, we went several years. We ended up filing for bankruptcy. So paying our tithing definitely did not help us build more wealth. We ended up having to file for bankruptcy because we had to dump that stupid timeshare somewhere. And then we had gotten a personal loan to finalize Eric's adoption. That was, the interest rate on it was just stupid high. And so we still paid that loan, but because of the bankruptcy, we ended up paying it with like almost no interest on it. So that way we were able to do it. And once we got rid of those two things, like we still paid off our car, so we didn't lose anything, but the only thing that disappeared for us in that bankruptcy was the timeshare and the interest rate on that personal loan. Like it was really sad. I look back on that and I'm like, wow, we had to file for bankruptcy because we couldn't pay that small amount of money. That's just how poor we were. But we definitely didn't get rich. And in fact, when Mason deployed about a year and a half later, we were still broke. Now Mason was an E4, which is a specialist, SPC, so still pleading for change. And the military, something happened in the finance office where instead of paying us the extra money that you get when a spouse is deployed, it's like a hardship bonus type thing. Instead of us getting paid that, for whatever reason, they subtracted that from our pay. And suddenly I wasn't getting hardly any paycheck at all. And that was shortly after the affair that I had had. So I was already talking to the bishop, and the bishop actually at that point was like, you seem to be really struggling. And they sent the Relief Society president to our house, and she went through my cabinets and was like, you guys have no food. How are you surviving? And I was like, oh, well, my friend, who in my book is Finn, but my friend Danny was feeding us quite frequently. And I was like, yeah, well, we just don't, because this is happening. And the church helped me, because I was in a military ward, they helped me get in touch with the right people so we could get the pay situation fixed. And that was the first time that we took advantage of the church's welfare system. And y'all...
Used. We didn't take advantage of it.
Yeah, we used it. I'm sorry. We utilized it to give us food.
You're not incorrect in what you said, but it just has kind of a negative connotation.
Right. But that was awful, because then, you know, here I am. I'm a single mama. I've got Eric. We aren't poor for our own failings. At this point, we're just poor, and the military took our money away from us. Like, at this point, we were much wiser with our money because we didn't have enough money to be stupid with. And I went in, and I was not even allowed to pick the own food off of my food order and put it into my cart. There was somebody babysitting me as if they were afraid I was going to take more than the order allowed. And I was required, I would get phone calls and they would say, you need to bake a casserole and take it to this person, and you need to go do these things. And I mean, I was so overwhelmed as a single mama with a small child, with my husband deployed, trying to establish myself in a community and deal with the fact that my ex literally lived 10 doors down the street from us and was, you know, we were trying not to sleep together again, you know, those types of things. Like, I had so much going on that I didn't have the emotional or financial reserves. And so then I was getting food from the church so that I could make casseroles to go and give to people who'd had a baby or something else. And I was thoroughly embarrassed, because if I gave them, you know, like we'll say a taco salad with a side of peaches or with some dressing, I'm giving them food from Deseret Industries, where everybody knows that I'm getting help from the church. And I felt so embarrassed. I was so humiliated, because it's not a quiet thing to get food from the church. Whereas if I go to these food pantries and whatnot, I'm there with other people who need help, but I'm getting the same food everybody else is. It doesn't have different labels. It doesn't, you know, and they're not giving me any requirement. And so when we got in a financial hardship place due to some natural disasters, when we were in Killeen, we took advantage of a local food pantry instead of going to the church. And that felt a hell of a lot more like I never felt dehumanized, because what we were given was not counted and monetized, and the overreach to make sure we didn't take too much, it just wasn't there.
I'm going to give kind of a light-hearted example of what's going on here. For those of you that have seen The Big Bang Theory, there's at one point in time that Penny comes to Sheldon and is talking about the fact that she doesn't have the money that she needs, and Sheldon's like, well, why don't you just borrow some money from me? So eventually she does, and then every time she sees him, she feels like he's talking about, you know, when is she going to give this back? And she like is freaking out. I feel like a lot of times, and of course this isn't every time, but it feels like the system of welfare that's set up by the church allows for, and frequently therefore utilizes, an ownership type thing. Well, we've given you this money, but it comes with strings. It's not just a gift. It's not just, oh man, you're in a terrible place here, let us help you out. It's always comes with strings, or can. I shouldn't say always. Right. It can come with strings, and much of the time it does. I served in a bishopric. I served as a bishop. It was frequently given as a, here you go, but Here you
you
go,
have
but.
to you have to do
Here
this.
you go, but. Yeah.
Well, and my issue is, I added it up, Mason, over the course of the, our marriage and our financial contributions to the LDS Church. We've contributed somewhere around $250,000 in the time that we have given to the church. And the couple of times that we have utilized the church welfare system, we've paid so much in, they can't give that back to us without conditions. Really? Like, we were nowhere near. We've maybe utilized church welfare, maybe between the couple of times they paid our house payment because of natural disasters. Every time it's been like a natural disaster or the military messing things up, I'm going to say they gave us less than $6,000 back total over the years that we needed to utilize it, but we gave in somewhere around $250,000.
Yeah. Well, then I want
And they invested a good chunk of it, and we didn't invest in ourselves.
I want to take us back to the freedom of mind resource that's here, the number 2 that's down right in the middle of it, the one this is undoing undue influence in the bite model. There's only 3 numbers on here, so the 2 right there in the middle, it says, while a group may receive billions of dollars from its members, they often do not put that money back into society to help people other than the cult leadership.
Where are you? Oh, right there. I see it. The number 2 in the middle of the first page.
Yep.
Got it.
I just kind of want to point out, when there are strings attached, the gift is not helping you, not in the long term. It is helping the church, because now they know that they own you.
Right.
And
if you
that's
look at
that's the cult piece.
Right.
Go ahead.
And if you look at the SEC discovery and the recent, 60 Minutes episode and the tax fine and all of those other things, what we also see is that the church isn't utilizing that money for what they claim to be collecting it for either.
There's a lot of deception about it. Yeah.
So again, when we come back to the Stephen Hassan thing in that first paragraph, what makes that culty is deception, flattery, trickery, coercion. And then we go back to the video from John Dehlin. You can't afford not to pay tithing. Pay tithing before you eat. Pay tithing before you buy your kids new shoes. Pay tithing before you pay your house payment. You'll get more wealthy. You'll be more physically attractive. You won't be cursed. You won't be burned. You're going to have a better marriage. Your health is going to be better. All these wonderful things, but there's no way to quantify that. No. And anybody who has a brain in their head knows that I am not going to get any prettier physically by giving money away, unless I'm giving it to a plastic surgeon to take the little extra chin I've got down here away from me, or maybe a little bit of this, I've had baby's belly. That might make me more physically attractive by societal standards. But damn it, so far my money I've given to the church has not gotten rid of the crow's feet developing at my eyes here. It's just not, damn it.
Well, and it's
liars.
It's trying to connect a thing like donation to an emotional piece of who you are. And of course, we've talked about, when it comes to cults, there is a strong emotional piece of getting people to come into and stay in a cult. And so it is those things. If you can take tithing and donations and connect it to blessings on one side or cursings on the other side, you've made it a black and white issue. Either you pay your tithing or you don't pay your tithing. It's right back to what we talked about on the last episode, the undue influence of either you choose to follow God or you choose to follow Satan, and that's it. There is no other piece. Instead of teaching people, you know what? If you give generously, we believe that God will bless you, and it will make you a better person by choosing to give and be supportive to other people. But instead, we've connected it as a rigid law. We've made your salvation
Right.
dependent on whether or not you're paying an honest tithe.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? The things you know make you feel better even when it's impossible to make time for them. Like that workout you try to squeeze in between kids' activities, work, and everything else you have going on, and before you know it, it gets pushed to tomorrow. Sound familiar? But it's the moments when you feel like you have no time for yourself when those non-negotiables are more important than ever. Those are the things that keep you strong, healthy, motivated, and prepared to take on everything life demands of you. So why not make therapy one of them? BetterHelp Online Therapy makes it easy to get started with affordable phone, video, or live chat sessions you can do from anywhere, and the option to message your therapist between sessions if anything comes up. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
Right, and this is where we go into the things that James asked us to do, and that is, if you don't pay tithing, if you are not generous to the church, your eternal salvation and happiness is threatened. You're going to be burned at the last days. But what we're going to be talking about next week in our cult series is time control and decision control. We're going to talk about how the church controls the lifelong decisions that we make, our time, and even our familial roles, how they define all of that. And we might have to break that up into a part A and a part B, but that's what we're going to talk about, because one of the other ways that the church exploits us financially is by how they control how we live our lives. So things like, I grew up being taught that my role, my divine role, was as a mother and wife in the kingdom of God. So my job was to get married, have children as quickly as possible after I got married.
And as often as possible.
Right. So I'm infertile, y'all. And we rapidly adopted our oldest son. Now, I probably would have done that either way, because I am going to be honest, I don't know how much my religious culture influenced this, although I'm sure that it did, but I absolutely loved babies, and I was in such desperate need to be loved by somebody that just because of my familial dynamics, that I'm certain I probably still would have married pretty young and probably still had kiddos pretty young. It was a societal expectation at the time as well.
You just never really know.
Right. I never really knew. But with the exception, though, is that I was told that my role was to be a stay-at-home mom, that I'm supposed to clean the house, cook the meals, and take care of the kids forever and ever, the end. And what happens is, what really changed for me that gave me an edge up over many other Mormon women is that I'd had a nightmare when I was very young that my husband was going to die and I was going to have to raise my kids alone. So the entire time that I was a stay-at-home mom, I only took a couple years off between my associate's degree and starting my master's degree. So
my bachelor's
degree. So I graduated with my associate's degree of arts in music and dance education shortly after we adopted Eric. And then so that would have been in 2001. And then I went back to school for my bachelor's degree right after I had Hayden, which was in 2006. So I had about a 5-year gap where I did not work because I was a stay-at-home mom. And I'm going to be honest, I am incredibly grateful for those years. I was on Facebook, and I'm a part of a group called Post-Mormon Ladies. Absolutely love the group. If you want an invite to that, shoot me an email and we'll work it out. It is a very friendly and enriching environment, but they posted an article that really fit with this. And that was, as a stay-at-home mom, nobody was contributing to my retirement. Now, Mason got his retirement from the military because of his time in service, but nobody including the church, talked about taking care of my financial future during the years that I was sacrificing having a job. I was not building my own retirement. I also was not developing any marketable job skills. And I had 7 kids. So if I was still following the be a stay-at-home mom, I would now be a 42-year-old woman with no education when my kids are all grown up and gone. My options for employment are low pay, entry-level jobs. And as a 6-year-old woman, I'm going to be competing with 20-year-olds. I cannot tell you how many clients I have had in this position that are having a difficult time finding work. A lot of those entry-level jobs are going to be much harder on a 60-year-old body, like stocking shelves and working fast food. Or as a restaurant, waiter or bartender or busser. Those jobs get harder. The other thing that was very interesting that I'd read that I'd never thought about until I read this article posted on that website, and I need to find that link. I will, Mason, hold me to that so I can send that. I can copy that link so we can put it in the show notes for that article. But the other thing that they talked about is that those, 5 years that I took off to be a stay-at-home mom meant that I entered the job field much later in life. So if you enter the job field into your career at a certain point, there are certain advancements and promotions that you get which increase your income very quickly. So if you take me as a counselor today versus somebody who maybe started their bachelor's degree and graduated, we'll say 10 years before I did, they're obviously going to be making more money. But if they started in their 20s and I didn't start, we'll say they finished in their early 30s, that would put about, when I'm looking at it, 18, and it took me about 6 to 10 years on average to get your master's degree. Most counselors are entering the field in their late 20s, early 30s. I entered mid 30s and later, but if I had been able to enter the field in my late 20s, I would have working for somebody else at the age that I started my career. I lost all of that promotion time, so I'm getting paid less now than I would have had I started when I was much younger. So you're giving up income in the future and a great deal of it. So not only did I lose the opportunity to invest in myself and have my own retirement account, but I started at the bottom of the pay scale much later in life. And that is very troublesome for women because we aren't guaranteed a healthy relationship, but the church teaches that if you do all of these right things, you're going to end up with this perfect happy marriage. So if I'm worthy and I go to the temple and I marry a returned missionary and I'm paying my tithing and I keep going to the temple and I raise my kids and all these things, that the Lord is going to protect me. And the reality is that is not guaranteed. And if I was to divorce Mason, and he stepped out, he's not here to put in his input. He had to step out because our kids are needing him. But if Mason and I got divorced today, financially, I would be screwed. Because if I divorce him, I lose my portion of his disability benefit if he precedes me in death. I will, because I was married to him for 10 years in the military, still keep 50% of his retirement until I die. But y'all, it's only about $1,200 for me. And I don't want to be 65 and only have a guaranteed $1,200 a month in my retirement.
I completely agree with the idea that the church doesn't help support women as an entity, right? They seem to do a lot to sort of help families. They certainly are supportive in a lot of ways. And I don't think necessarily that it's the church's job to teach people how to do finances or things like that. But if you're teaching something like give tithing no matter what, if you're teaching something like women's places in the home, but not teaching some caveats to that, if you're not recognizing that, yeah, we want families to be together, but our divorce rate is just about the same as the rest of the United States.
Right.
What's happening to these women when they get divorced? They're completely dependent on somebody. Like it strengthens abusive relationships because women don't have somewhere to go. And frankly, the church supports you staying in the marriage.
Right.
And so it's all this is all exploitation. And whether it is overt or covert, it is exploitation. You're keeping basically 50% of your membership essentially slaves. And I hate to use that term, but in a lot of ways that's accurate. You're essentially keeping them slaves to the church and to their husbands in this case. And it's
right.
just, that's this cult-like mentality. And this is absolutely not singular to Mormonism, but it is very strongly a part of Mormonism.
Well, and on Steve Hassan's worksheet here, page 2, under the behavioral control, number 1 is regulate individuals' physical reality. So you've got that. It's more so for women than for men, but still for both. But then also at the end of that little box, number 18 says instill dependency and obedience. And so there's, and impose rigid rules and regulations, discourage
right.
individualism, encourage groupthink. So there's a lot of things on here that ends up happening to our women because of this financial control. If it was, hey, if we're going to pay our tithing on our excess, make sure that you are, paying for the things that you need, that you're avoiding debt, invest in retirement, make sure that if you've got a stay-at-home mom with small children, you're investing in their retirement as well. One of the things that I love about most European countries is that they give women a stipend for when they are staying at home, because one of the things that we
right.
see in the research is that the mother-baby connection and the wellness of a young child like that is much better and reduces all kinds of mental illness and physical health and those types of things when there's an involved mom or caregiver all the time close to that baby. And then the other thing is that those women are not punished for coming back into the work field after having been a stay-at-home mom, but also the number of children that the Europeans have is much, much less. And so, we in Mormonism and many other cults tend to burden families financially by the ideal of not only do you need to have children, but you need to have as many as you physically can have. I mean, hell, it was not that long ago that birth control was banned in the Mormon church, just like it was in the Catholic church. That, physically stopping a baby from being born was considered to be messing with God's plan.
How dare you tell God I'm going to run my life, right?
Right.
How dare you? Because now, but that's the control mechanism, right?
Right.
You cannot have control over your own life because somebody else already has it. And in this case, it's an existential thing. God knows what you need.
Right.
He wouldn't let you get pregnant if he didn't want you to have kids. Well, that's bullshit.
Right. It's one more example of what we talked about last week, which is giving away your free will to the system's ideals. So the whole idea of giving free will back to God, which is I'm not going to choose to take birth control or use condoms or whatever, because then I could be potentially impeding God's plan for me and how many children I have. It's overbearing. And gratefully, birth control is now considered a personal decision, according to the handbook, but it wasn't always. And the issue that I
Well,
have...
It never should have been controlled by the church.
And the issue that I really have when it comes to... See, I disagree with you, Mason. I think that if a church is out there saying you need to pay tithing, I think, and most churches that I'm aware of do have at least some financial classes. And now they finally do under the, what is it called? The self-reliance courses. They have a finance class.
Yep.
But honestly, they basically ripped off Dave Ramsey's plan and put it with some Mormon scriptures. So it wasn't until a decade ago that the church actually taught a financial course that talked about investing into retirement accounts and long-term savings.
And it's still lay teachers. It's still a volunteer thing.
Right.
You don't have any experts teaching that stuff.
Right.
They're just reading the manual just like everything else that they
and you're
teach.
having a discussion. And then that's the other thing is that so many people are not able to get a second job or do other things to bring in extra income because of their church callings, which again is why next week we're going to be talking about how the church hijacks and controls your time constantly because it limits your ability to gain resources, and they don't educate you wisely on what to do with those resources because they are promising you if you do these things, you have nothing to worry about. And when you're stuck in that mind control space, you don't worry about it, Mace. Like you just said, I wasn't worried about my future because I was doing it the way they said. I had a year's supply of food, which has saved our butts several times. But honestly, if I didn't pay tithing, I never would have needed to dip into a year's supply of food. If I didn't pay my tithing, I never would have needed help paying our house payment. And when I left the church, I told Mason, we can't pay tithing for a little while. I need a break. And we were finally able to get on top of things financially because we stopped paying the church $1,400 a month.
It did make a difference.
Made a huge
difference. So you said you had a couple other things on this line that you wanted to talk about.
Nope, I'm done.
No, okay.
So now we wanted to talk about what are the members' responses? Like, how does this trickle down and affect y'all and the true believing Mormons or the members of the cults? Thoughts and experiences. And I think we've already touched on that quite a bit. But Mason, you have a specific example that you wanted to share about somebody who is purposefully and probably not even realizing it, closing their eyes to the larger issue to spout out the same things that the church teaches.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So because this is about the SEC fine and finances and the exploitation that's going on, I'm going to read what I posted. I said, thinking about the LDS Mormon Church and the recent SEC fine and the quote-unquote not real answers from the 60 Minutes report and something I listened to today from Mormonism Live. Oh, that's a long sentence. Bill Reel stated that the church leadership has deemed that the reasons to be secretive and not transparent about their wealth are more important than the reasons to be transparent. What do they lose by being open and transparent? Apparently more than they are losing by being dishonest and secretive. That's all what Bill Reel offered. It's paraphrased, but that's basically what he said. And then I added here at the end, wonder what else they might be hiding. Anyone? And he kind of asked that same sort of question. So that's kind of from Bill as well. But if you're looking at the church and saying we're fracturing because of all this secrecy, and you're still
keeping it secret,
not being open about it, it makes me wonder what the heck else reason might you have for not sharing? Well, my uncle gave a response here too, and this is the one that I'm going to read from him. Asset valuation. Asset valuations are subjective, subject to fiat monetary manipulation, and really have no meaning until they are sold. Not true, to start out with.
Right.
Assets. And in this case, we're talking about stock assets.
Right. We're
The
not talking
SEC
about
fine-
real property in this case. We're talking about
The SEC fine was all about investments in the stock market. How fast can you sell those? Today, right now, this moment, I can sell those, and I have cash on hand, digitally for sure.
Right. It
but I
takes a
have
little. There's a little
cash
more
on
to
hand.
it, but it's pretty quick.
Right. It's not like selling a house.
And I want to make sure that we reiterate the fine was because they committed fraud on purpose by not filing the certain forms that required them to disclose how much they had in stocks and bonds. But I mean, that's kind of I would call it a straw man argument because number one, he's wrong. Number two, the issue is that they have, and the one that they were going after, I want to say it was $32 billion. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
you mentioned straw man. I feel like I'm in Fantasia with all the walking brooms. Like there's so many straw man things that he throws up in this little argument of his.
So, but I want to point that out is that as you're listening to your uncle's response, it's a distraction. Don't look at what they're doing. Look at these other things. You know, when we look at even that video that John Dehlin posted, it was don't think about how hard it is to pay your tithing. Focus on the fact that you're going to look better. You're going to get richer. You're going to avoid being cursed and burned. Your marriage is going to be happier and you're going to get to heaven. Focus on that, not on the financial burden that it is to pay.
And good golly, if all those things aren't enough, think about the fact that you can't afford not to pay this. Think of all the things that could go wrong if you're not paying your tithing.
Fear, if you don't pay it.
So we'll start with the
Bad
blessings.
things are going to happen.
Please do this because look at all these good things that we have. But if you don't do it, oh my gosh.
Right. And
just
so
look at that.
This is that true believing Mormon. This is I like to say this is kind of that, like, I'm so brainwashed, I don't even see how ridiculous my argument is.
Well, and whether or not the assets have real meaning or not is completely irrelevant to this story.
Right.
So he says then you are asking the wrong question. It's not what the value of an asset is. Who cares?
Time out. That sounds like David Bednar. When you ask him a question, he's like, oh, well, that's the wrong question. The question you should be asking me is, and then he answers his own question.
Right.
Kind of like on that movie Zootopia.
Yeah, Zootopia, yeah. Don't ask, you ask your own questions. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, but the big thing here, he says, it's not what the value of an asset is. Who cares? Well, Uncle, I care. That's why I posted it.
Right.
Lots of people care. That's why there's such a hullabaloo about it. So when you say, who cares, you're just trying to minimize the fact that so many people do.
Right. And the reason people care the reason people care is because I gave you my money to provide operating costs and help the poor and needy. That's what you said you were going to do with my money, not invest it and make billions of dollars off of it.
So let's take a quick commercial break. Unpacking Mormonism. We'll be right back.
Well, ultimately, we're looking at how membership, after they've been manipulated into this situation, how they respond.
Right.
Okay, so he says, who cares, but what it's being used for. So in his idea, that's the question we should be asking, not whether or not they cheated or they lied or all that stuff.
Right.
What is the money being used for?
Well, and we know what it's being used for.
Well,
it bailed out an insurance company and it bailed out a mall.
As far as we know.
Right. 2 for-profit organizations, which you're not allowed to do when you're a non-profit organization.
Right. From what we know, that is the only time that those funds were used for anything.
Right.
Right. Okay. So he says, but what is being used for, good or evil, ? Okay.
It's
Fine.
being used for nothing, so it's stagnant.
Fine. And you know what? If you want to look at the church's resources and say, what are they using it for? Fine. I don't have a problem with that. But then he goes on to this. Have you been to the bishop's storehouse? Well, let me just stop you right there. First off, you're talking about money that is not related to the SEC fine.
Right.
So you've thrown up another straw man argument. It is completely irrelevant to this situation.
Are you going to respond to this, Uncle, and put
I
all
did.
of this?
I did.
Okay.
But I don't think I really delineated all this crap because I'm not trying to argue with him about it. It won't do any good. And so now I can do it on this platform.
Yay!
But I just want to throw that out there. Another straw man argument. The assets that the assets that Ensign Peak has, that the SEC fined them over, have no relevance to the bishop's storehouse. Not one iota.
Right, because the bishop's storehouse isn't funded with tithing money.
It's funded with
fast offerings money, and that money is what is actually used to feed the poor and the hungry. It would appear that the tithing money is not used for that.
Right. And this, again, the manipulation, right? He's worked himself into this situation where it does not matter what the church does with that money. I'm on their side.
Right. And this is
I can't critically think.
Right. This is where you're looking at things with blinders on. I can only focus on the good because if I focus on the bad of the church, I'm sinning.
Yep.
I can't criticize them. I'm sinning.
Yep.
I have to doubt my doubts. Otherwise, I'm sinning. And I'm afraid of losing my eternal family, my
Yep.
exaltation,
Yep.
my status in the church, my social community, my everything
Yep.
changes when you
And
leave.
everything that you just said is on that bite model. Like every single one that you said is an example on the bite model. So he goes on, have you been to the bishop's storehouse? Being in the bishopric.
Well, I had to laugh at that because you were a bishop.
Right. Like it's.
Like, did he forget that you were a bishop? Because he's in the bishopric.
Right.
You've been a bishop.
So I have seen the people who have been issued food orders. I've never seen one denied. Good for you. Good for you.
Well, but how often would a bishop deny a food order and then tell his counselor about it? Because usually
Right.
those food orders are done between the bishop and the Relief Society president until recently when it is occasionally farmed out. But usually only the bishop and Relief Society president are supposed to know who's getting those orders.
That would be accurate.
So
yes.
he wouldn't even know because he's not a bishop. He's just in a bishopric. He wouldn't actually know who the bishop told no.
Well, and he's in a strong LDS area, so it's possible that there's more ability to
ascertain
to let your counselors. There's the word I'm looking for is
delegate.
yes, thank you.
Better
it's
able to
possible that
delegate.
the bishop could delegate to his counselors. So I don't want to say that's never happened. It didn't happen for me
Right, you did all of
as a
the
bishop
orders
because I had to sign them all. So, and the person that was best suited to do it was my Relief Society president, who'd been a Relief Society president 7 times before that. She knew what she was doing. She was one of the greatest assets I had to work as a bishop. So
Right.
I let her do what she was good at, and I signed the orders. But anyway, so I've never seen one denied. Good for you. You're talking about 100 orders, maybe, if I'm being generous. My guess is probably not anywhere close to that. 100 orders in one single community because he's lived there his entire life. He lives in the house that he grew up in.
Right.
His entire life, he's been in the same place except for his mission, and I think he went to school at BYU. So
He has no life
there
experience.
is no experience outside of the Mormon community. Your opinion on this matter is
Limited.
flawed.
Right, well, because when we were in North Carolina, we saw a bishop decline a food order for the family that lived across the street from us. Because non-members, because they weren't members, they didn't want welfare abuse, and the dad was, or the male that was living in the home at the time, I'm pretty sure was dealing some drugs.
Right. He had his valid reasons, whatever they were. I've denied them. I've said, no, you can't have a food order. So whether or not I was right, I'm not going to go into that at all. I'm just going to say it's happened.
Right, which is difficult. Like,
Yeah, it wasn't an easy decision ever to make at that point in time. So he says, members and non-members alike in my community, talking about never having denied an order. The assets that have been given to the church, farms and ranches, etc., by generous donors from what I see are being used well. Okay, good for you. You're again not talking about what I posted
right, you're
on.
not talking about tithing money.
Right, you're not talking about the SEC. Then he goes on, and this is typical of my uncle as well. Yes, the Marxist government bureaucrats would like to get their hands on them to use them instead to mutilate children's genitalia, but I think the assets are much better used where they are at. Well, if that is the only choice that we have, I agree with you. But your straw man doesn't stand up because it's not the only choice that we have. And the government is not looking to seize their money. The government is looking for them to follow the laws that have been put into place because, frankly, nonprofit organizations like religions are given huge, huge amounts of tax breaks so that they can function because they're nonprofit.
Well, and that is a thought control technique.
Yes.
In the sense of the Mormon church and its members have preached for years and years gross distrust of the United States governmental system.
Right.
Now,
but they can't see the same thing in the church.
Right. They
They
cannot.
cannot. They
Right.
will refuse to
and
see
there are
it.
several members of your family who are super into their conspiracy theories and cannot see the parallels of how they believe with the
refuse.
church, despite the fact that with the church, there is credible evidence that supports the quote unquote conspiracy theory, whereas theirs is kind of
Right.
interesting.
Right. So what did you have there? You're looking for something. What did you want to share?
No, it was that I was looking at what it was, and it's instill a new map of reality under thought control.
Right.
And that's really where we see a lot of mental status changes or mistrust of those outside. It's you have to decide between good and evil. It's us versus them. So it's the Mormon church versus the United States government, which can make the Mormon church very, very dangerous because they don't trust the Mormon government. So,
right. So in that same one, thought control. So this is number 3 under the BITE model. Number 7 under thought control says this: teaching thought stopping techniques, which is what you're talking about, which shut down reality testing by stopping negative thoughts and allowing only positive thoughts, including, this is the big one for me, the first one there, denial, rationalization, justification, and wishful thinking. All of those seem apparent to me in his one statement about what's going on.
where are you at?
Under thought control, number 7, A.
Okay. Oh, I see it. I see it.
They're all there because in this case, this uncle is standing on the side of the church is correct. I'm going to formulate whatever argument I can to essentially stop you from arguing the other way. He hasn't, in what he said, he has not refuted anything that I said on my statement. He has not
He's
refuted anything that
trying
the
to shut
SEC
you
said. He has not even addressed the argument about the SEC. He has completely moved to a different topic in the hopes, wishful thinking, that will be enough to get people to stop talking about his church finances.
Yeah, absolutely. The last plug-in I want to put in here is not only does the Mormon church have a circular reasoning, circular logic, like all answers lead back to the Mormon church, which is what you're seeing there with your uncle's response, but most of their giving is also considered incestual giving,
right?
Meaning that the majority of the donations that they're claiming, close to $1 billion a year now. I mean, we went from like 16 million to 900 million in a year once something got leaked, and we'd have to, look that up and something. So my numbers may not be completely accurate.
It was
but
either RFM or Mormonism Live, which is RFM and Bill Reel, that go into that and where that money and those numbers came from.
Right. And it sounds like they just doctored the numbers, but the majority of that money comes from the fast offerings, or it's assumed that it comes from the fast offering donations, and most of it goes right back to the church members, which isn't necessarily bad.
No,
except
not
that
at all.
Jesus, if we're going to follow the example of Jesus, gave to Jewish, non-Jewish, Christian, non-Christian.
At least we assume
anybody.
so. I'm not sure that's clearly defined in the New Testament, but it sure seems that way.
Well, I mean, he
said give to the poor. There's no delineation
no
as to whether or
delineation.
not that was people following him or not following him.
Right, because the Mormon church is not helping the poor. They are keeping them poor by telling them that they need to pay their tithing rather than feed themselves. And if they do so, they'll get rich. Well, I haven't seen huge changes in the economy in South America since the Mormon Church got there, or in Africa since the Mormon Church got there.
I'm not qualified to make that assessment, but yes.
I'm not seeing it. We're building these. I mean, really, honestly, when we lived in El Paso and we traveled into Juarez to go to the Mormon temple in Juarez, you had this beautiful temple with the temple grounds and what the United States would consider a ghetto around it. It was such a stark reality of this glorious multi-million-dollar building in the middle of grief-stricken poverty just across the United States border. It was disgusting. It really was. So the real question is, what can you, the listener, do about it? And number one, the biggest thing that I say, my answer is, when you give money, identify what the organization is doing with that money, because I'm not willing to give to a nonprofit organization unless their financials are transparent and I can see that I'm contributing to something that I have a passion about. I'm very upset. I'm in the place of the Mormon Church took a chunk of the money I donated in tithing. Where's my dividends? Because I obviously invested in the Mormon Church unknowingly. Where's my portion of the dividends?
Yeah.
And the answer is they don't legally have to give those to me because of a nice little thing that says we get to use your money however the hell we want to at the bottom of that tithing receipt. So be informed before you give. You know, one of our favorite ways to be generous are things like supporting small businesses or being generous in our tips to the waiters or the waitresses. Or, you know, when we were foster parents, we were on the receiving end of those giving trees that they put up in Walmart and helping little kids' dreams come true. So pick your passion. What are you passionate about? And be generous on those types of things. The closer you are to the person or people that you are helping, the more love, there's a bigger connection. You get more benefit of that generosity when you're giving as directly to the cause that you appreciate. And so do that. You know, I know that our neighbor in North Carolina put in her will that she wanted 100% of her assets to be like basically liquidated and divided into spay and neuter clinics for animals because the lady loved cats. She had like 30 of them or something. Her house was rancid to walk by, y'all. Love her. She has passed away. Rita, my heart, wherever you are in this universe at this time, I love you. And I love that you put your life's work into something you were passionate about when you were alive. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, there's one talk that I heard in General Conference that I actually really enjoyed, at least the principle that I'm going to share here. And it was one of the apostles. I don't remember which one. Maybe I'll try and find it, but not really all that relevant.
Be careful. You'd have to go back and listen to it to pick out the manipulation pieces. But the principle that you enjoyed was...
The principal piece of it was the farther you get from where your donations go, the less personal it is. And I don't think that applies more appropriately than if you're giving your donations to a tithing slip that goes to a central organization that goes to people you will never meet.
Right. Isn't that interesting? Like, you need to be closely related in order for it to have the most benefit or whatever. And it goes to the Mormon Church.
Right. Well, and this was all the manipulation part of it this was all what you choose to donate above and beyond what you've already donated to the church. So they're still full of manipulation. But the idea that the closer you are to the people that you're donating to, the more it will mean and the more good it will do. So I'm not here to tell you how to donate your money because you guys can figure that out on your own. There are numerous ways to do it. I just want you to be informed about what's happening with your money. If after this you decide you still want to give to the church because of the good they do, good on you.
Right.
I'm not doing that. And it's because of the things that we've talked about. And we've only grazed over a lot of things. We could go way deeper. But I just want you to recognize what's going on so that you can make the choice about where you want to go.
Absolutely. The other thing you can do about this is recognize that unless you are a financial advisor or counselor or expert, you probably need some help. Go seek that help. A great start for us was the Dave Ramsey program. It's limited. It's a great stepping stool. It's a great start. Honestly, the church's financial piece, that's Dave Ramsey still. The church's, Mace, what was it called again? The self-reliance. Their financial self-reliance class has actually got some really good info in it. So if you are a member, it's a great place to start. But once you've got a certain amount saved up, you really need to go and see a financial planner. For those families out there where there's a stay-at-home mom in the home, maybe you guys need to talk about getting a retirement account set up in just the stay-at-home parent's name. So that way, if something goes wrong, that individual is protected and compensated. Also, my recommendation is male, female, parent, stay-at-home parent, whatever, get an education or some type of skill training in an area that you love so that way you can bring in an income.
Ultimately, we're looking for independence.
Right. We're looking for
rather than dependence.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. We are looking for independence rather than dependence or codependence. And remember, codependence is I feel so unstable, I'm trying to control everything around me, right, including the people around me. Keep in mind, the Mormon church is codependent on its members, which is why they are using cult-like tactics to control what you are doing, the decisions you're making, the way you behave, the way you think, the way you feel. Thanks so much for being with us today. We cannot wait to come back next week and talk about some of that time control and behavioral control that the church exhibits. We love you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Today's episode was hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. We would love to see you on our Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma Facebook page.
Hey, welcome back, Mason. The kids are
I'm
alive. Kids are alive.